the tsunami that we never heard of before, we are standing strong. Together, we have come far, and now we take on a global pandemic. Life may be unpredictable, but hope illuminates our hearts. However challenging life may seem today, we know tomorrow will be brighter. The H&B Assurance Group is proud to have journeyed together with you for 20 years, providing life and general insurance solutions that give you the protection and assurance you need. Now with even greater stability, reflected by an upgraded A+ Fitch rating. Your trust in us has proven to be well placed in the grand journey behind us, and for the exciting one ahead.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Sri Lanka Institute of Directors, let me warmly welcome you to today's session, which is the launch of the Young Directors Forum. The Young Directors Forum was brought about early this year to provide a platform for young directors and future boardroom leaders to engage their minds on topics of interest relating to performing their roles more effectively and efficiently. A little bit about the Sri Lanka Institute of Directors. We have been around since the year 2000, standing at the forefront of corporate and boardroom governance in Sri Lanka, bringing together the largest community of boardroom leaders comprising of directors as well as aspiring directors representing both the private and public sectors in Sri Lanka. We as an institute is committed towards creating better directors, better boards, and better companies. And we do this through our best-in-class board leadership training, as well as a wide range of knowledge and skills building programs to help our members perform their roles more effectively. With that brief introduction to the Institute of Directors, let me welcome our chairperson, our chairman rather, of the Young Directors Forum, as well as our moderator for today, Anushka Wijesinha, who is an economist and international consultant in trade competitiveness and innovation working across Asia. Anushka is an independent non-executive board member of Seylan Bank PLC, H&B Finance PLC, and Fairfirst Insurance, and is the co-founder, CEO of the Center for Smart Future. With that, Anushka, it's over to you to take over today's session.
Hi, Radhika. Thank you very much for that generous introduction. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to join all of you this evening as we kick off the first of the knowledge sharing and networking events of the Young Directors Forum. The speakers in this in today's panel are in fact the working committee members of the Young Directors Forum, the first inaugural working committee members. And as you will see, we have a really interesting mix of folks from different backgrounds, different types of companies. And I think that's also important to convey during this inaugural session, that we really want to reach out to young directors and director aspirants of different types of companies here in Sri Lanka. It could be listed companies, private companies, startups, and of course, eventually also public sector SOEs as well. We have a bunch of activities planned for the rest of the year, which hopefully you'll get a hint of throughout today's session. And we'll also recap later on at the end. We'd like you to stay engaged with us because I think all of you would find different things that are useful as part of the Young Directors Forum, different entry points for you to engage with, different types of activities that you would find interesting over others. So the main thing is to stay connected with us. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists today. We have Annika Senanayake, who is on several listed company boards, and we have, and she's also Director of Corporate Planning at IWS Holdings Group. We have Sanjay Jayawardena, who is the founder and CEO of Spirit Kitchens, and also quite a lot of experience in the startup world, having played a leadership role in ODOC prior to that as well. Deshal, who is Research Director at Verité Research, who's also on the board of a couple of listed entities, particularly Sampath Bank and Janashakti. And of course, we have Charaka, who is Director COO of Stafford Motor Company, and who's also the SLID Council rep. He's on the main leadership committee of SLID, and he is working closely with us at the Young Directors Forum. So let me dive straight into what we want to get to today, everyone. We have a couple of questions, a couple of rounds of questions that I will pose to the different directors here. And really, it's a conversation we'll be having among ourselves and with you to try and tease out what it was like for many of us as young directors in the different types of companies that we're on the boards of. None of us, I guess, had the answers on day one. There were things we learned along the way. There are things that we wished we knew starting off that we probably know better now. And there are things that we have become a lot more reflective and savvy about now that I think would be worth sharing, particularly with direct aspirants. And ultimately, we hope that some of what we are sharing resonate with many of you in the audience so that these can form the basis of future networking, knowledge sharing, peer mentoring kind of events. So let me dive straight in by asking Sanjay. Sanjay, we're seeing more companies bring on young directors to their boards, and this is an interesting and positive trend in Sri Lanka, often as independent non-executive directors, but also from within. So, just to get us started off, why do you think that this shift is happening, and are you seeing it with a particular type of business in particular sector than others, or not quite? Start us off, Sanjay.
Yeah, thank you, Anushka, and good evening to all. So to understand the reason, I think we need to dive into the notion of diversity and how diversity is shaping the boardrooms today and helping companies make better decisions. So when we look at diversity, we need to consider all elements of it. So you got diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of background, gender, ethnicity. So then age really is a key element of this notion overall. So it can be argued, and I know I'm going to get into trouble for saying this, but a lot of younger directors are actually in a better place when it comes to providing a fresh perspective or fresh way of thinking. Apart from that, they're also less likely to be resistant to change. So in today's market, we see a lot of businesses, a lot of industries going through rapid change, and this has been happening over the last couple of decades and has been further accelerated through a pandemic. So we see companies recognizing the importance of looking at things through a wider lens and getting the right mix in the boardroom. So this, I believe, is one of the key reasons as to why this change is taking place at this moment. Is it happening enough? Probably not. However, one general thing that we tend to see is that companies that have innovation, adaptability, inclusivity as well as diversity as a common thread that runs through their core value system, these tend to be the companies, in my opinion, that are the front runners when it comes to change in the board composition.
Thanks, Sanjay. And I think you're right. We're seeing a lot of Sri Lankan companies that are trying to compete with using innovation, creativity as new drivers, and we're seeing that they are more likely to bring on board diversity into the boardroom. Deshal, I want to move over to you, and you serve on a couple of boards in financial services, and you have for a few years now. And financial services, as we all know, is highly regulated, high compliance burdens, many challenging issues to navigate, not least these days with all of the good conditions. Have you found that young directors on these boards are called upon to provide different inputs, provide a different perspective to those of older, more established directors, or simply to weigh in the same way and just provide an additional voice? What thoughts do you have on that?
Yeah, thanks, Anushka. Great question. No, I mean, I think specifically when you think of sectors like financial services, there's a fair amount of rigor that goes into selection as well, right? Because you do have vetting by the regulators also. And oftentimes, when a director is brought in, it would not just be because somebody is young. There would also always be a kind of specific skill that is required as well. That could be in risk management, it could be in finance, it could be in technology. And I think always the inputs of the director would kind of lead from that skill, right? So beyond the age, the board would expect that director to to weigh in and really provide those inputs, really drawing on their own expertise and those skills as well, right? So I think that is something that would generally be the case for regardless of age. But that said, I'm going to agree with what Sanjay said, in that there is a lot of value that comes with the diversity of thought and the ability to bring in different perspectives. So even say for the financial services sector, it is valuable for the board to get an understanding of how would a younger customer segment view certain products, right? So how would even from an employment perspective, if you're thinking of trying to attract employment into your institution, what are the kind of things that you need to do from an HR strategic perspective? Again, the perspectives that a younger director would bring in would be very different to what somebody who has got 3 decades of experience would bring in. That perspective is very valuable in that sense, and it applies across a range of different areas. So I certainly think that that diversity of views certainly helps in terms of those choices as well. And also, I think there is a tendency or an expectation that younger directors would have a better grip on some of the newer technologies or the newer kind of trends that are ongoing in business. So, for example, again, drawing on the financial services sector, whether it is on payments related technology, whether it's on fintech, whether it's on e-commerce, there's a general expectation that a younger director might have a better handle on some of what is going on globally and also locally in those areas. So there again, like somebody who has who has been a veteran of the industry, a veteran on the board, might be able to bring in the kind of tempering influence on times of saying that, okay, if we do bring in this new payment solution, we might have such and such regulatory perspectives to consider. But at the same time, you get the younger director who says, look, but this is an exciting avenue. We can tap into X and Y markets by doing so. So this is really the diversity of views, that kind of cross-pollination of ideas that provides a good outcome in terms of decision making. And I think really that is where the value of diversity comes in, and younger directors can really add value in that sense. So it's both from the kind of skills input side, but also a lot of value comes in from the diversity of perspective that is brought to the table.
Thanks, Deshal. And I think it echoes some of the things that Sanjay said also on the broader aspect of diversity. And it's interesting when you say that, these different perspectives and, being a champion for different types of initiatives. I think what I also sometimes see is that folks in the management who also want to try new things then find resonance with a particular board member or a set of board members who feel or think the same way, and then, that there are opportunities for allied activities to take place, and they feel comfortable to bring new ideas to you because you might be more able to champion it at the board level. Annika, speaking of this point about different perspectives, what unique perspectives do you believe younger directors bring to boards? I think the reason I ask is that sometimes I find myself providing simply an additional voice to a discussion point, an additional point of view, not necessarily a young view, young voice. But at other times, let's say on progressive issues like environment considerations or technology and gender, then it feels like, okay, this is the young director's voice coming in. So, straddling those two, in your mind, what are the unique perspectives that you think younger directors bring to boards? I think, Annika, we need you to unmute yourself. Perfect.
Right. Anushka, I would generally tend to agree with you. Fundamentally, boards are responsible for driving its business forward, keeping it under prudent control and creating value for all its stakeholders. With digital transformation and increased complexity in businesses, we're looking at new skills and oversight. We also see more companies engage in data mining, AI technology, digital applications, just to transform the way that it does business and provide its clientele with more digital customer-centric solution. And this, again, like Deshal touched upon, is quite broad and also applies to marketing with more social avenues available to reach customers moving increasingly towards digital platforms. So I just feel like younger directors that fall in the category of millennials are digital natives, just inherently by the age factor. So they have more insight and possibly exposure to the digital sphere, either by work or by association. They also have more access to their peer networks that can support information flow and hence provide different perspectives, especially with fast-moving technologies that would really add value to a wide variety of industries. So again, as Sanjay mentioned, fresh perspective and insight, very, very crucial to any business, and especially so at this time of digital and social transformation.
Thanks, Annika. And I think it's an interesting one that given almost all of our companies, Sri Lankan businesses, whether they're domestic facing or outward facing, have to embrace digital, and they're kind of sometimes navigating between what kind of investments to make, what kind of digital transformation to go down. So what you're, I guess, saying is that have a younger person on a board really provides a useful voice in that transformation, even though, of course, the management will have digital experts.
Absolutely.
Having, board level competency and literacy is important. But just I just want to probe a little bit on that, Annika. Do you feel that in your time on some of these boards that you've kind of infected the others with that knowledge and with that kind of perspective? Are they receptive to hearing these, or is it still the young director who is providing this voice, and it's still that single voice in the room? Or are you seeing, you're able to kind of proliferate these ideas of the young directors across the rest of the board? Just a, casual take.
No, I've been actually quite fortunate to serve on listed boards that have been very open to younger directors and diversity, which is why I'm here now. at this field. Similarly, so I think very open-minded, very easy to communicate, and they take our perspectives well, I feel. Yeah. So from my perspective, just a very good experience.
Okay, good. That's encouraging. And I want to actually pick up a question, because otherwise I might lose it as we go along, and hopefully this will encourage others who are on the Facebook Live to ask questions. We have a question from someone who's following us on Facebook Live, and I want to pose this to Sanjay. Sanjay, in a Sri Lankan context, have you ever come across millennials with boomer mindsets? And I guess we'll limit, I mean, this is a very general question, but maybe at either at a board level or in management, board interactions, is this something that you've come across, and how does that? You need to unmute. Perfect. We can't hear you, Sanjay. We'll come back to you in a second. So hold that thought. We'll come back to the question. Charaka, before we move on to a few other broader questions, I think it's a good opportunity to bring you in here, given your position in the main council at SLID, and you're the council representative for us at YDF. What are some of the key connects you see between SLID's ongoing initiatives and future journey and this Young Directors Forum? And what were some of the expectations and goals that SLID had in mind when deciding to establish this new forum? Because we've seen SLID's forums relating to very specific and technical topics like audit committees, INED, Independent Non-Executive Director Forum, Chairman's Forum, and so on. Now, this is quite different in that it is specifically age-related, or specific type of director, Young Directors Forum. So what was SLID's thinking around setting this up, and what are the expectations that you guys have?
Yeah, thanks, Anushka. I'll get to the second part first, of course. The previous speaker spoke a few words about repetitive words were innovative, fresh thinking, new ideologies, things like that when it comes to the youth. And obviously faster adapting than the more experienced elderly counterparts, wherever they are. So youth leadership has been seen in all sectors, whether it's politics, whether it's corporate leadership, whether it's NGOs or startups, all over. And as Sanjay also explained earlier, the rise of youth leaders in boardrooms, younger directors, they have proven themselves all over and over again. So the primary focus of the Young Director Forum, in terms of the SLID's point of view, or YDF as we refer to it in short, is grooming the future board leadership of corporate Sri Lanka. In short, I could say that it is. We believe that through YDF, we can identify the needs of the younger generation, younger directors, or the needs of the people who are about to step into the boardroom for the first time, Anushka, and develop and roll out programs and sessions which will fulfill those needs. So we also have identified that there are concerns or maybe issues which are more relevant to them. And for example, let's say, how can I make my voice heard in the boardroom? Or maybe how can I handle difficult conversations with the senior directors? Or maybe even how to make a positive impression as a first timer in the board. So these are questions which are in their minds and which are very pertinent to them. But obviously there are no books to read about it. And learning from a director who has been through the mill, it's also not easy. You can't just go up to somebody and ask these kind of things. It's not easy. So this is where we feel that the activities of YDF would be very useful to the younger directors. We expect that YDF to roll out mentoring sessions, peer mentoring sessions, where experienced younger directors can maybe coach and advise their lesser experienced contemporaries. Maybe have networking sessions for young directors where they can mingle with like-minded and stimulated crowd so that they can discuss the issues. And also, YDF would be rolling out forums and events to raise these issues and discuss and find solutions for them. So these are the things what we feel that would be useful for them so that they can be more efficient and effective at the next board meeting also. So Anushka, these are the things that we were expecting from the SLID's point of view when we rolled out YDF. And if I go back to the first part of your question, that is about the connections between SLID's journey and YDF. As you correctly mentioned, under the SLID banner, we have quite a lot of forums and committees. And those can be used by the YDF members. For example, the CEO forum. We have a lot of young CEOs now and young CEOs as well as CEO aspirants. So the CEO forum of SLID, which is set up to sharpen the skills of CEOs, will be very useful for the YDF members who are currently CEOs as well as who are hoping to be. And then we have the Education and Training Committee under the SLID banner, where we do continuous learning and personal development activities. And in fact, our flagship training program, which is the board leadership program, is being handled by this committee. And that is the program, I would say, if any young director wants to learn about board governance or the roles and responsibilities of a director, for example, that is the thing to follow. It's a program that we run throughout the year. Okay. And another example is the Women Directors Forum, which drives the advancement of women on boards. And also, they're very focused on building a very strong and very strong female leadership pipeline. So the females or the ladies in the YDF, for example, can certainly join that, be part of it, and learn from the best, learn from the women who have reached the pinnacle of leadership in corporate Sri Lanka. So similarly, we have, as you mentioned, Independent Directors Forum, Family Directors Forum, Board Secretaries, likewise, so much of forums that you can learn from. And another point, Anushka, is that SLID is part of the global network of director institutes. So that means we are connected to most of the director institutes in other countries, where there's a vast amount of resources that we can tap as members. And some of these director institutes have their own YDF, a Young Director Forum. So there again, we can create connections, share information, and learn knowledge, get knowledge. So these are the connections what we see between YDF as well as the ongoing process of SLID.
Thanks, Charaka. And I think that's something we'd really like to connect up to. I think I speak perhaps on behalf of this entire working committee of YDF and others in the audience, that those international connections with other direct institutes, particularly their YDFs, would be really useful for us to be on top of the latest thinking. It could be around, the future of work, given this whole hybrid working culture. How does the board consider, the future of human resourcing in that? So these are all topics we'd like to try and explore with these partners in the other countries. I have a question for Sanjay. Sanjay, I'll come to you to the millennial boomer oxymoron question in a bit, but I just want to pick up from what Charaka said. Now, you heard some of the activities that SLID has in mind. These are some of the things that we talked about also in some of our first meetings, working committee meetings. What of these activities do you think you are most excited about, or you think will be most appealing to existing young directors as well as director aspirants? If you could, pick up a couple of the ones that you think would be you're most excited about. Sorry, Sanjay. Maybe our friends in the technical side could check. No, we heard you fine earlier, but unfortunately. Okay, we'll come to you. Deshal, Charaka mentioned this board leadership training program. I think you had followed it in a previous cohort. I think we're keen while YDF comes up with our own activities, also to try and get young directors who might be members of SLID to participate in some of these core training and capacity building programs. As a young director, how did you find this program, the board leadership training program? Could you share, in brief for other young directors who might be considering it? They might have been getting the flyers and the emails. As a young director, what did you take out of it and how useful was it?
Yeah, so I mean, I believe I took that course quite early on, and to be honest, I think it's a very steep learning curve, right, for anybody who joins a board. So it certainly helped in terms of kind of getting to grips with some of the initial situations. But really, I think the value is that it ought to be the real value would be if you conduct that on an ongoing basis. Like you go in there immediately, everything it's very alien, right? So, but I think maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, if you do kind of a refresher, I think a lot of stuff would probably click more, and it makes a lot more sense once you have experience of it as well. Otherwise, you're kind of going into a program with theory without really too much practical experience. The blend of the two is really where the value comes in. But to be honest, it was extremely helpful in terms of understanding the critical stuff with regard to compliance, with regard to your regulatory obligations, your legal obligations, governance. It's an extremely diverse. It's got very good coverage. And also you get to learn from, like very senior experienced directors in Sri Lanka. There's a lot of practical aspects to it as well. And there was some really interesting sessions on it on, financial fraud and all sorts of fun stuff. Great case studies. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I think I would really recommend doing it and also doing refreshers as you go along.
Okay, great. And I think this is a balance we're trying to strike at the YDF, that we have some content that is quite technical and foundational material, but also things that are more practical, more informal, perhaps through the networking, peer mentorship, peer networking kind of activities. While Sanjay gets back to us, Annika, during some of our early YDF meetings, we had talked about the need to reach out more widely and in more accessible formats as part of the activities of YDF. Now, I couldn't help but wonder how important is this really when considering that in Sri Lanka, the number of young directors actually on boards is still quite limited. So when we talk about reaching out widely, what kind of areas do you think young directors could provide a view to a wider group? What kind of topics, perhaps?
So reaching out more widely in our communication is very significant. Just for that exact reason, one of the primary goals at YDF, as Charaka had mentioned, touched upon earlier, is also to provide access to foundational information to this particular demographic. So one of our first steps is creating awareness, utilizing social media platforms that are available, and providing content specific to this initiative. Again, to generate awareness and to possibly inspire more young leaders or future aspirants via knowledge sharing and information sharing coming from young directors to make it a little bit more relatable, I feel, and also, breaking some of the stereotypes and changing the conversation in the boardrooms right now. Another one of our goals is utilizing digital platforms to engage and connect with some of the younger generational networks, and seeing how we can harness this, and possibly with the association with the other forums at SLID, at the Institute, to also network providing opportunities for exposure also. Because at the end of the day, if boards aren't aware of you at all, it will make the selection process that much difficult.
Okay, I think that's an important one, because as Charaka mentioned, one of the things we want to achieve through this YDF is to prepare more director aspirants for potential board roles in the future.
Absolutely.
Almost in a shorter period of time, so that we are proliferating the presence of young directors on more boards much quicker than a slower route might take.
Yes.
I want to pick up on something that has come throughout about the kind of skills and knowledge or even the ideas that you need to have as a director. Annika, if you were to cast your mind back to the your first appointment as a board director, what do you wish someone told you at the outset, that could have perhaps prepared you better for the journey ahead?
Yes. So prior to getting my first appointment, my experience was solely private sector, and largely relegated to the IWS Holdings Group, which is predominantly based on international representations. We ran lean operations, and it was a system that had open access to top management. So the shift was pretty significant for me from a structural perspective. So in hindsight, I would have liked to have known a little bit more information on. I would have liked to take the foundational course that Deshal took earlier on, because I think, because it was just basic information on public entities and board structures and the technicalities involved. Just really foundational information, really. Because when you join a new industry, you'll be consuming just so much new information and knowledge. That setting that basic foundation in anticipation of an appointment or the appointment would have made this much easier and frankly less apprehensive for myself. It's a whole new world when you open that door. So I think I also would have liked to understand the time commitments a little bit better as well.
Yeah.
So I think so when you go in, you're like, okay, board meetings and so apart from attending the board meetings and board subcommittee meetings, you need to set aside adequate time for study, along with reading board papers, subcommittee papers. You'll also be engaged in stakeholder engagements and events, in addition to your current roles and responsibilities. And as a younger director, I would assume also largely for many of us, our career cycles would be at a point which is a little bit more operational in nature. Some would be taking the reins at their primary places of work or family businesses, making new shifts into their personal lives. So it's a real juggle of balancing all these responsibilities at once. And I think knowing maybe some of this, I could have preempted it and possibly align myself a little bit better in handling all my responsibilities at that time.
Okay, great. I think, your point about preparation, perhaps even before you have a formal appointment, in preparation or anticipation of potentially getting one, but also once you do the kind of preparation to be an effective director, to be a useful, productive voice, 4-hour board meetings requiring double that amount of time in terms of preparation, doing justice to that role. So thank you for that. Sanjay, do we have all good on the...
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
All right, brilliant. I had to change computers.
Okay, good. So just want to come back to you,
Sure.
Having heard what Annika talked about preparation and things to know, but also some of the things Charaka mentioned about the activities that we would potentially do. Which of those are you thinking would be most useful, most compelling for you?
So looking at like sort of the broader initiatives and some of the things that, even the YDF have planned, I think one area that, I would find quite useful, and, starting off, even if I had that, it would have been much helpful for me, is along the lines of mentoring sessions. So whether, you have like sort of informal conversations with, or chats with similar peers who've been there, who've experienced some of the challenges that they have faced, which are similar to what you are going through, as well as having the chance to sort of speak with more experienced directors, some of the chairmans also, along tips basically on how to like get through and like handle different situations. So I think that is something quite useful, because generally when you get into a board, you can be a bit lost at the start, until you find your feet, and you can like have a lot of difficult conversations that you need to get through. You need to understand how you need to prepare better for the meetings, and sort of what are the topics and how you really can add value to the business. Because at the end of the day, as an executive or an non-executive director, what we really need to strive to see is how we can really bring about value to the discussion. And generally, from what I gather and what would be helpful going forward, especially, one of the things of having, of being quite young, is that you would by default have less experience. And therefore, speaking to people who have that wealth of knowledge is something that I find quite useful, and that's something that I would be looking forward to. Similar to like the panel discussions that we're having right now, similar forums and similar situations would give valuable insight, I think, not just to me, but other aspiring directors who are looking to make a dent in the industry. So that's something that I tend to like look forward to, and hoping to come across some of these in the near future as well.
I'm glad you mentioned the connection with the chairman, Sanjay, because that's one of the activities we're actually planning. In fact, perhaps our next YDF event or activity will be an event with a prominent chairman, where it's a closed setting, safe, informal environment where young directors will get to interact very directly and candidly with the established chairman for corporate boards. So everyone keep tuned for that when we announce it. Deshal, I guess I want to pose that same question that I posed to Annika also to you, but also this question of what are some of the challenges that you think young directors in particular face on corporate boards, especially independent non-executive directors like you and I. How can the YDF help young directors overcome some of these? And perhaps you can also throw in there, what do you wish you knew before your first appointment?
Sure. Yeah, Anushka, of course, joining any board is challenging, right? Whether you're a young director or not. There's a additional challenge, I think, for young directors, particularly in countries like Sri Lanka, given our general cultural norms. We need to kind of bat a bit above our average to be able to really gain the respect of our colleagues, respect of the others on the board, respect of the management. So that is, I think, as I said, it's very much a cultural thing, because typically there is automatic respect given to age and to experience. You need to work a lot harder to kind of make up for that gap if you are a young director. And I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, oftentimes any director would be selected to a board based on a certain skill set, right? So really, I think the best way to build that recognition, build that respect, is to really demonstrate your capabilities in your skill set, and to really earn trust and based on really that expertise that you can really show. Going beyond that, of course, another big challenge is again, kind of getting to grips with all of the regulatory and compliance issues that are incumbent upon you. That goes from the new Securities and Exchange Commission legislation, companies law, industry-specific regulations. Getting a grip of all of that at the beginning can be extremely daunting. I remember very early on when soon after I joined my first board, we had a very prominent lawyer coming in and, talking through some of these regulatory things. And he probably saw how, wide-eyed I was. And he said, "Have you read the Companies Act?" And I was like, "I guess I should." And so I think there's a lot to really catch up on in those early stages, really understanding your liabilities. And I think that is an important challenge that young directors would really need to face. I think thirdly, what I would say is, how do you strike the appropriate balance between issues of oversight, which a director needs to do, and operational issues? It's very easy to kind of slip between the two, get bogged down in nitty-gritty stuff, and then really lose sight of really what the director's role ought to be. So I think these are areas really where the YDF can provide very useful guidance, right, in terms of how to straddle that balance between operational versus oversight roles, how to kind of navigate your regulatory obligations, your legislative, your legal obligations, and so on. And those kind of technical things YDF can certainly provide through the knowledge sharing exercises. But I think really the biggest value that YDF can really provide is the kind of mentorship and experience sharing. And that is really where those first issues, like how do you kind of gain respect of your colleagues, those you can't find that in a textbook, right? That is really comes through conversations, sharing the learnings and experiences of others. So really, I think YDF has a big role to play in kind of this entire gamut of knowledge sharing, from technical stuff to mentorship, sharing experiences, sharing stories and conversations. All of that can really help in terms of helping a young director as you begin your journey.
Thanks, Deshal, and hope we can play a role in that, as you mentioned, as YDF. Sanjay, I want to quickly come to you because Deshal and I perhaps come from the perspective of an independent non-executive director. But unlike us on this webinar, you are perhaps not in INED, particularly in startups. So what sort of skill sets do you think would be important for younger directors who function as executive directors, compared to INEDs? And also maybe the second question is about startups bringing young directors on board as independent directors. So it's two questions, kind of skills needed, or kind of skill sets needed for young directors who are executive directors, but also putting your startup hat on, the kind of opportunities for independent directors in this new startup world.
Yeah. So for me, mainly, like one of the most important skills that I tend to see for executive directors is the ability to effectively communicate. So that's effectively communicate to build trust with the rest of your board. So when you look at startups and when you look at SMEs, the functional responsibilities of the company and the division of labor between, say, the CEO and the board of directors, it becomes very clear to define the boundaries. So in most cases, the CEO runs the company. So it's up to the board to decide whether they trust that the CEO or the executive director or his leadership team can actually run the company. If they do trust the CEO, then it's much easier for the CEO. So what I see is, to be an effective director, executive director, you need to be transparent in what's going on. And that really needs to be a two-way process. It's not, okay, you, the CEO, run the company and we, the board, will just sit back and watch. It should be, yes, you, the CEO, you do have the authority and the responsibility to run the company, but you need to keep us informed on what's going on, and you need to include us in the difficult decisions that you make. So you need to use the wider board for their expertise, and they should never be surprised by what's going on. So that's my opinion in terms of the most important skill in terms of executive director in relation to his board. To answer your second question, so whether we see a lot of young directors joining startup boards. Well, I wouldn't say it's happening enough. I think one of the common mistakes that a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of CEOs make is that they look at the board as a way to collect famous names or impressive resumes or network. impressive resumes and network should be something that comes as a follow-on to the value and the diversity that the board members are bringing on. And when it comes to the board, you need real skills, real competence more than famous names. You look at how diverse individual business any of our businesses are, and therefore you need to think about, okay, bringing in the right people, whether it be sales, whether it be product, whether it be engineering. So having the right mix, young, old, etc., it's very powerful. One other thing that's happening, and which is quite useful, is where we see entrepreneurs and CEOs bringing in similar CEO peers onto their board. So I think this also is very powerful, because it gives an opportunity for that CEO to be able to like communicate effectively, something to relate to, and also that the CEO peer will be able to relate to the challenges and the problems that you're facing. It's not that the rest of your board cannot help you with those, but by having a CEO peer, I feel it's very effective and it can be quite productive.
Thank you, Sanjay. I think that was an interesting perspective, because we want the YDF to not only serve and appeal to and be useful for INEDs, but also others in startups, in SMEs, executive directors, and also young directors on family businesses, which I think bring about its own set of challenges. And I want to pick up the last question that we'll have time to today from the audience, and I hope someone will volunteer. The question is, any candid advice about being on the board of a family business from a young director's perspective? Any candid advice about being on the board of a family business from a young director's perspective? Could I perhaps Annika, Sanjay, Deshal, who would like to pick this up?
Maybe I can.
Or as comfortable as you feel. Maybe Charaka and then Annika.
Sanjay, go ahead. Sanjay, go ahead.
Charaka and then Annika, perhaps. Charaka, you want to say something?
Yeah, well, if I may pitch in on that, because I'm also in a family company board, where I would say one thing that you need to identify is how the family looks at the business. So that one of the key things I would say, because as a director, you might have your ideas, you might have your way of thinking or how you want to do certain things. But at the same time, while you pursue that line, you must be quite aware of what the family's objectives are, what the values are, so that you need to be aligned with that, so that the two paths are going the same way. I think that is one of the main things with that, because I've been working for a lot of family companies along my career, and that's one of the key things what I've seen, that we need to make sure that the family values are kept while we expand the business or while we take it to the next levels. That is kept throughout intact, so that it balances everything. That's one of the key points, I think.
I think that's an absolutely vital point, Charaka, because especially family boards, family businesses that are increasingly bringing on independent directors. I think independent directors have to understand that it's not like being on a PLC. There's a different, objective set. There's a different culture, and being mindful of that. So that's a really important one. In fact, hopefully YDF, to this question that has been asked on Facebook, thank you very much for that. I think there is merit in us doing a crossover set of knowledge events with the Family Business Forum of SLID, given that young directors on family boards might be an interesting one to do. So we'll definitely take that on board. Annika, anything you'd like to add? I think we're coming to we can wrap up after that.
Yeah, I think, just following on from what Charaka mentioned, I think everybody should have a clear sense of direction and synergy, and just agreement across across the board. Very clear definitions of what will take place. Because it is a family business, there are different dynamics at play. This is not something that you will be like, you can shut off, you go home, and then you'll meet them on the weekend, So I think one has to be very professional in these circumstances and really do what's best for the business at the end of the day, because that's the main objective.
Great.
Family run or otherwise.
Great. Okay. And I'm going to wrap up with asking Deshal and Sanjay a quick question, looking forward and looking at the kind of conversations and thinking in boards you see today. So Sanjay from unlisted private companies, SME and startups, Deshal from a PLC, INED perspective about new issues, new strategic issues that you think need to be discussed at boards from what you're seeing is discussed today and the kind of issues versus what as a young director you think ought to be discussed with emerging challenges on the horizon. I won't give examples because that might influence, but what are some of the things that you see over the next year, over the next 5 years, Sri Lankan boards are going to have to start talking about, and perhaps young directors may be the ones to drive that conversation or at least be the catalyst for those topics to be talked about. So perhaps Deshal first and then Sanjay.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely, Anush. I think I think certainly there will be a requirement for a greater focus on ESG related issues, right? I think that is, you're seeing that already very well established in most global companies. Sri Lanka is probably a little bit behind on that, except a few companies that have taken a kind of extra few steps there. And I think it's important for young directors to take the lead in that kind of issue. It's not that most senior directors wouldn't care about it, but I think oftentimes you can very easily be bogged down in the kind of day-to-day operational stuff and often lose sight of the kind of the longer term issues that are outside of the realm of the company itself, right? So I think that is an area where typically our generation has a good sense of awareness, or a better sense of awareness than say previous generations in terms of having a view and a greater kind of sense of issues around ESG in particular. So I think it's a great opportunity also for young directors to kind of carve out a presence as well, to be able to establish themselves as the kind of knowledge leader or the driver for the board on these kind of issues. So I would think, I would really see it as an opportunity for younger directors to provide leadership, and I think there's a lot that Sri Lankan boards, Sri Lankan corporates need to do towards better establishing their own positions on ESG related matters. So I think it's a great combination and a great opportunity for young directors.
Sanjay, last word to you around emerging topics that aren't quite getting focused now that need to be, and young directors could perhaps play a role in.
So, from my own personal experience, what I can say is that what we see when it comes to Sri Lanka and say like digital adoption is that there is a bit of a lag compared to the rest of the world when you talk about certain industries and how these industries are actually shaping and changing. So with the emergence of gig economy, and as you can see, a lot of disruptive businesses coming forward. So my previous experience at a startup, which was focusing on health tech, one thing that we noted was that a lot of the compliance and the regulatory was not keeping up with how these businesses and how the industry was shaping. So this then becomes sort of a block, or in terms of a issue when it comes to conducting operations, when the regulatory aspects do not keep in the same pace as the sort of the technological improvements that we see in certain industries. So for executive directors and non-executive directors alike, similar to like what Deshal just mentioned, it's important that, we are sort of having those conversations with the relevant authorities and the bodies at this stage, in terms of compliance, in terms of regulatory, so that, we keep up and there is no sort of block when it comes to like conducting operations and moving forward and progressing, because at the end of the day, as a country and as a nation, we need to progress. And we can see that in markets such as India, where there is significant progress especially in the startup ecosystem, thanks to how the regulatory areas are shaped. So we need to see if we can get a seat on the table when it comes to having these discussions with the relevant parties, so we can share the views and to sort of shape the framework in terms of how we're going to operate in the future.
Thanks, Sanjay. So I think from Deshal around ESG, I totally agree with you around that, and sustainability as a core part of the business, not just as CSR or nice to have. And from Sanjay, the point about digital, again, at the core, not just, thinking of this is the job for the CIO or the CTO to do, but more really core, strategic, board level, and young people being able to play a key role in that conversation. Folks, we are exactly at the 1 hour mark, and we, as young directors, perhaps should set a trend for things starting on time and ending on time also. So in that spirit, thank you very much to all of our audience who joined us on Facebook Live and who will watch this video later after this live has ended. It's late in the evening on a work day. We hope you got something out of this, and also, more importantly, not just from what was shared today, but it inspired you to stay connected with the Young Directors Forum and watch out for future events that we will have, whether it's around the mentoring sessions with prominent chairmen, peer mentoring with fellow young directors in informal settings, knowledge events that we will do with the rest of SLID, but also with international knowledge partners, and just being able to connect informally as peers, as young directors, hopefully in person sometime soon. If you'd like to connect with the Young Directors Forum and find out about activities, the email address that the Secretariat would like you to use is ops, that's OPS, at slid.lk, ops@slid.lk, and SLID is also on a bunch of social media channels, so you can connect as well. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you to Deshal, Annika, and Sanjay, and of course Charaka, who is our council rep, and certainly to the folks at the Secretariat, the Executive Director Radhika, who's been a great pillar of support for us as we started this journey, Sarah, Natasha, and of course Mr. Faisal Saleh, who really put a lot of thought and effort into bringing this group together and giving birth to the YDF. Stay connected, everyone, and have a good evening. Thank you.